Right. I know. I said, well, look, the kids.
Good morning, everybody. We'd like to call the meeting to order. Thank you for attending. This is the Caernarvon Interagency Advisory Annual Meeting. We're excited to have everybody here today to talk through the operations plan and review the work that's been done over the last year. So excited to chair this today. My name is Glenn Ledea, the Executive Director of CPRA. With that, just a few opening comments. As everybody knows, this is the Caernarvon Freshwater Diversion, originally authorized in the 1965 Flood Control Act. But this is the structure that's on the east bank of the Mississippi River, designed to divert up to 8,000 CFS of freshwater nutrients and sediment into the Breton Sound estuary. And so the purpose of the structure, as we all know, is to benefit the Breton Sound Basin, both reduce marsh loss, create emerging vegetation, as well as benefit the commercial and recreational fisheries and wildlife. And so excited to be here today to talk through that with everybody and the committee. And so with that, we'll kick the meeting off. The first item is to do a roll call. So I'll turn that over to John Troutman to do that.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. I'm going to call you a federal agency, and you indicate whether you're present or not. So U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, John.
Present.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Present.
NRCS. Here. There's John. U.S. EPA. Present. Marine Fisheries. Noah, Marine Fisheries.
Present.
Dawn. Louisiana DENR. Sarah's not here yet. She did text me and said she's coming in. She's running a little late. Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. Department of Health, they're not attending today. Louisiana DEQ. We've got our Plaquemines Parish representative.
Present.
St. Bernard Parish. Here. Oyster Fisheries. Here. Brad, glad you joined us. Shrimp Fisheries. Recreational Fisheries representative. I did talk to Jim Hassick, and he's not available this morning. Marsh property owners would be protected property owners. That's actually you, Mike. You're protected. But Dawson is and then Pontchartrain Conservancy. Dr. Hillman, thank you. All right, we do have a significant quorum, so we're good.
Thank you, John. I appreciate everybody's attendance. As you can see, obviously, this is a partnership between federal and state agencies, as well as fisheries, parish government, and landowners. So appreciate everybody making the effort to attend. With that, we will move on to the second item on the agenda, approval of minutes from the previous meeting. And so that was sent out by Danielle to the committee. And so with that, I'll take a motion to approve the minutes. Thank you, Jeff. Any seconds?
A second.
Thank you. With that, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed. With that, moving on to the third item on the agenda, approval of the meeting agenda. And so as you can see here, this is the revised agenda as of December 9th, 2024 that was sent out to the committee. It provides that update on maintenance activities by Mr. David Chambers, the report from the technical working group, Danielle, the presentation for the recommended operations plan, followed by public comments and a roll call vote, and then new business and adjournment. So with that, I'll take a motion to approve the agenda.
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Ricks. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. With that, the meeting agenda has been approved, and And so we'll move on to item 4, update on maintenance activities. Mr. David Chambers from CPRA, would you please present that? Thank you.
All right. For those of y'all who were here last year, which is most everyone, I mentioned a couple of maintenance items that we were planning for Caernarvon, and we got them accomplished this year. So this is actually 2024 information, and 2023, which is what most of the meeting's about, where we're planning and getting the contracts together and everything for these maintenance items. The first one is the stem nut replacement. This is for valve 5. The stem nuts, these are mechanical operated gates. So there's a stem that this nut rotates around to lift the gates up. And so it's a very important item. And these are designed to wear so that we don't, so the stem doesn't, to protect the threads of the stem. And gate 5, we knew it was at the end of its useful life. So we've had that gate closed awaiting replacement for a while, and we had to get the materials and everything for it and get it machined. So this is them starting the replacement. The core did the work. And the first photo, you can see you gotta kind of take everything apart. There's a stem cover that sticks up there, and then you have the actuator and everything. You can see all the pieces that we had to take off, on the ground there. And then the last photo is him actually lifting the stem nut out, the old stem nut. And you can see these are the threads on the old stem nut, and it was at, its useful life was over. And the new stem nuts on the right, you can see like the old one, the threads were worn off up top. They're very thin in other places, and it was just, that was it. And this was the only one that was still in place from the original construction. This is what the new stem nut looks like, and that's the valve stem that, that the stem nut rotates around to. Discussed planning for last year was the control box refurbishment. And you can see what the old control box looked like. This is valve 2. You can see the condition it was in, and then you can see, what it looked like after the refurbishment. Both of these work items took place July, August timeframe. We're finished up in August. This is, what the inside of the box looked like, and then afterwards. Everything was recoated. We put new seals in, a new heater, like all new components and everything. And you can see, the old condition and what we had. And that's it as far as the maintenance. Any questions or anything? Okay, thanks, y'all.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. With that, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda. We have a report from the technical working group.
everyone. My name is Danielle Ricciardi, and I'll be providing a brief summary of operations and monitoring data from 2023. So, to review the Caernarvon Interagency Advisory Committee, the group that's assembled here, is composed of representatives from federal and state agencies, from parish government, from fisheries, landowners, and the Pontchartrain Conservancy. And the purpose is primarily to advise CPRA's Executive Director, Glenn Leday, who is the SEAC Chair, on information that's relative to the diversions operation. That includes when we operate, how much we operate, emergency operations, those sorts of things. In addition to the SEAC, there is a subgroup of committee members that's the technical working group, and we met back in November. It's composed of representatives from state agencies and also representative from the Corps. And the main purpose of the technical working group is to develop the Caernarvon operations plan, which we are now presenting during the SEAC meeting. We also provide advice on operations and monitoring and resolve any sort of technical issues or operational changes that need to be done during the year. So, brief background on the actual diversion itself. It was constructed by the Corps between 1988 and 1991, and then operations began in August of 1991. Since the start of operations, there is a 50-year plan for OM&M, and we're currently in project year 34. The diversion itself is located on the east bank of the Mississippi River. It's in Plaquemines Parish at river mile 81.5 above head of passes, and it's composed of 5 culverts. Each one is gated and is 15 feet by 15 feet. The total discharge possible through the diversion is 8,000 CFS. Operations, maintenance, and monitoring is cost shared between the Corps and CPRA, project partners. The Corps pays for 75%, CPRA is responsible for 25%. And CPRA is also responsible for the day-to-day operations of the diversion. Primary goal of Caernarvon is to reestablish that hydrologic connectivity between the river and the Breton Sound Basin, thereby reducing the issue of saltwater intrusion from the Gulf of Mexico. The 3 primary objectives of the diversion as far as monitoring is to enhance emergent marsh growth, to reduce marsh loss, and then also to increase the productivity of commercial and recreational fish and wildlife. So, go over a summary of operations for 2023. All right, this is how we operated. The blue line, you see, is the discharge of the diversion. So we operated with 2 pulses for all of 2023. It's a total of 38 days. About 10% of the year, and each pulse was 19 days long. We were closed in 2023 for 108 days. It was almost 30% of the year, and most of that was due to the encroachment of the saltwater wedge further upriver. I think everyone's aware of the significance of this and how it impacted freshwater intakes for Plaquemines Parish. So we closed the diversion on September 21st, 2023, just to keep as much river water in the river as possible. And then we reopened on January 29th of 2024. So it's a pretty significant closure. The first pulse was greater than the second one. That was from January 30th through February 17th. And the mean discharge during that time was about 6,300 CFS. The second pulse was a little lesser. That was from March 16th through April 3rd, and the mean discharge during that time was about 3,500 CFS. So in addition to the diversion, that's the one input that we can actually control, in the basin. When the river stage permits, we have Mississippi River discharge as the primary freshwater input into Breton Sound. That's the main driver of salinities in the basin, both through discharge through the mouth of the river where it wraps around and comes up into the basin, and also through the passes, which on the east side of the river, which has become a more considerable input with expansion of Mardi Gras Pass and Neptune Pass throughout the year. Rainfall is another major freshwater input for the basin. 2023 was an extreme drought year, which we'll talk about more. When you have drought, it increases salinity in the basin. When you have years with a lot of rainfall, that can result in lower salinities in the basin, either for an extended period of time if you have a really rainy season, or for shorter periods of time if you just have a large rainfall event. Did show on here the blue bars. That is the actual river stage that's being shown on this graph, and the river stage is the bar that's on the right side of the graph. So it increased January up until like March. March was the highest river stage. It was 11.6 feet. April was almost the same. It was 11.5 feet. And then we had a decline of river stage and stayed low, through the summer, through the fall, and winter. And it was lowest in December. It was 2.4 feet then. The monthly mean salinity is also graphed on here. The upper line, the green line, is for Stone Island, and the lower one is for Bay Dougherty. And those are our two primary gauges that we use for operations. If you look, let's see. All right, so this is our Crooked Bayou gauge, which is the gauge that we use to monitor salinity when we're operating off of the 5 part per thousand line. And that is used June through November. Then we use the Stone Island gauge, which is right here. And that is the gauge that we use for operations when we're operating off of the 5 part per thousand line. And that one is used January through May and December. There's also 2 gauges that we consider reference gauges. They're in the middle of the basin. One is Snake Island, one is Bay Gardine. Those are used if the gauge goes down, and also just to provide a more general idea of salinities in the basin. We'll be talking more about this when we discuss the operations plan, but just briefly, I know you all are aware of how we operate. Again, there's 2 primary gauges. We use one for one part of the year, another one for the other part of the year. It's for Stone Island and Crooked Bayou. We use a 10-year monthly mean salinity that we use to develop our range for operations for salinity. So we have the 10-year monthly mean salinity and plus or minus 1 standard deviation to determine the actual range that we're targeting for operations. We use a 14-day salinity moving average that we track within that range. We use that so we're not turning the diversion on, turning the diversion off. As everyone knows, salinity goes up and down rapidly in the basin, so this gives us more of an idea of short-term trends rather than responding to erratic changes. We operate with a base flow of 500 CFS when we're not pulsing the diversion. Excuse me. And we have a low salinity trigger that triggers a return to 500 CFS base flow if we are pulsing. That trigger is going to be either the higher of -1 standard deviation of the 10-year monthly mean, so the lower range along that mean, or 5 parts per thousand. And on this graph, that's the red area that's shaded in there. So that is when we would revert to base flow. And we have 3 consultation periods with the Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. One of them, the yellow bar, is for shrimp, and then the other 2 are focused on oysters. So we'll look first at Stone Island and how salinities fell with operations in 2023. And again, this is using 14-day mean salinity. So the blue line you see is the discharge. The red line is the actual salinity. The area that's shaded in blue-gray, that's when this gauge was being used for operations. Again, that's between January and May and in December. So the annual mean for the year for this gauge, which is associated with that 15 part per thousand isohaline, was 15.5 part per thousand. It's actually quite close. When the gauge was being used just for operations, again, that's in the graph shaded area, the mean salinity was a bit lower. It was 12.3 parts per thousand. And if you look at when it was within the actual operational range, that was about 59% of the time, and it was above the upper range 37% of the time. Most of that was due to December, when we were really at the height of the drought. The salinity was above the range the entire month then, but our diversion was closed, we weren't able to operate, and additionally, the river stage was so low that even if we could operate, we wouldn't have been able to get much flow out of the diversion, if any, due to the potential for backflow through the structure. Switching to the other gauge that we use for operations, Crooked Bayou. This one operates off of the 5 part per thousand isohaline, and it's used for operations June through November. The annual mean salinity was 6 part per thousand, which again is close to 5 parts per thousand. When it was used for operations, again, that's the shaded area on the graph, June through November, mean salinity was higher. It was 8 part per thousand. It was within the range about 36% of the time and above the upper range 64% of the time. So this was really when we were having the significant drought impacts. Plaquemines Parish was in drought from mid-March through the end of 2023, but it entered more the extreme, higher categories of drought later in the year. The 2023 drought, we had the 3rd lowest rainfall since records started being collected at the New Orleans International Airport, so since 1948. And that was 39.9 inches. I think the lowest was 38.8 inches, so it's close to the lowest rainfall, total annual rainfall that we've seen. And this map provides an idea of salinities in the basin. The other 2 graphs are salinities at a specific location. This is interpolated salinity throughout the Breton Basin. We used 25 salinity stations. Each of the dots and the numbers that you see on there represents the annual salinity at that site for the year. We then interpolated between those points and got this graph. Blue is the freshest, red is the most saline. As you can see, salinity increases from west to east in the basin. The freshest station was Cribbs 0148, which is right by Mardi Gras Pass. The salinity there was 0.8. The most saline station was Stone Island, the furthest east, and the mean annual salinity there was 15.6. Those stations are, this is Cribbs 148, where we have the lowest salinity. Here's Mardi Gras Pass, and then there's Stone Island. So the takeaway from this for the year was that at the 5 part per thousand line, the interpolated line, which is the dashed line and it's marked 5-I, was actually slightly down basin from the established isohaline, which is marked with a 5. So it's a little bit fresher. But the 15 part per thousand line, the interpolated line, so what we actually measured, was slightly up basin from the target. All in all, kind of close. For the year, we were within, close to the range, that 5 to 15 range. Briefly, also did an analysis looking at interpolated salinities when we used the Stone Island gauge, which is January through May, and in December, that's when we're targeting the 15. And then when we use Crooked Bayou, which is June through November, when we're targeting the 5. Main difference here, when we were using Stone Island gauge, the drought hadn't really kicked in yet. So salinities were fresher. the 5 part per thousand interpolated line was down basin, and we were lower than 15 part per thousand in the basin. Stone Island, during that time, it means salinity of 12, so there was no interpolated 15 part per thousand line because it was fresher than the target. But during that second half of the year when the drought really kicked in, you can see the impacts of that. The 5 part per thousand interpolated line was close to the target. It was a little bit more salty further north around Crooked Bayou, and the 15 part per thousand line was actually up basin. The interpolated line was up basin, up around Snake Island. Snake Island for that period of monitoring was 14.7 parts per thousand. So you can see the impact of the drought and how it did shift salinities up basin. So we're going to talk briefly about vegetation. I know everybody's seen this graph before, but it's a really good one. It is a breakdown of fresh, intermediate, brackish, and salt marsh between 2013 and 2021. The 2013 imagery is from Sasser and all, Sasser et al. And then the 2021 is by Nyman et al. So it shows the change in the extent of marsh classification between 2013 and 2021. The big takeaway here is intermediate marsh, which is that hot pink color, has expanded. Brackish marsh, which is the blue color, has declined. And then if you look along the river in the 2021 imagery, you can see there's been an expansion of fresh marsh in that area, largely due to the passes and the water that's coming through. And we went ahead and took a closer look at specific vegetation monitoring stations in the basin. 3 specific stations that are located at different distances from the diversion. CRIMS 115 we looked at, which is the most northern station. The Nyman analysis had categorized that as intermediate marsh. Took a look at the actual species and looked at the CRIMS categorization of salt marsh, and it was similar in 2023. Fresh intermediates, categorized as fresh to intermediate marsh. The main species were smartweed and alligator weed. So this station is staying pretty consistently fresh to intermediate marsh. We haven't seen a recent change in this station. A little bit further south from that, we have CRIMS 135, which is in the mid-basin. The Nyman classification categorized this as intermediate in 2021. This station has been shifting a bit. Between 2009 and 2020, our CRIMS categorization classified it as brackish, but since 2021, 2022, 2023, we have been having an increase in intermediate and fresher species. So it might be transitioning to fresher marsh. It's going to take a few more years of monitoring to tell. One sign that it could be doing that is we are seeing a decline in Spartina patens, marsh hay cordgrass, and we're seeing an increase in more intermediate species like the vine, Vigna luteola, hairy pod cowpea. And then the furthest distance from the outfall and also from Mardi Gras Pass is CRIMS 147. Nyman classified this as salt marsh, and CRIMS, based on the community composition, also classifies it as salt marsh. It's remained salt marsh since 2008. We haven't seen any change with that. It's primarily a typical alterniflora, Juncus marsh, but alterniflora is declining, and these last few years we have seen an increase of some other species coming in that may indicate some sort of transition, an early sign, but it's too early to tell. Anyway, it is still very firmly a salt marsh. Next, we're going to go through a summary of wildlife and fisheries data. So all of this data is collected by Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. They use it for management, opening of seasons, establishing regulations, and determining species population sizes. All of the data for fisheries were collected through fisheries independent monitoring, and all the data for fisheries is available through SIMS, so the data can be downloaded from our website. And You can find out more information about the data they collect in the 2023 annual report and also in individual reports that they produce on different species that are very informative and provide a lot more information than is in this report. So first, we'll start with waterfowl. This was for the 2023-2024 season. They collect data using aerial surveys in September, November, December, and January. There were a total of 3,707 birds counted during the survey. The highest number was collected or counted in January. That was 2,846. The three most abundant species were scaup, which includes lesser and greater, blue-winged teal, and green-winged teal. And most of them were counted in intermediate marsh. And that's a classification that they assign their marsh classifications when they're doing their surveys. If you look at the long-term average, counts have remained low. This is from about 1987 to 1988, going through 2023 to 2024. So below the long-term average, and between the 2022-2023 season and this year's season, or 2023-2024, there was a 26% decline. So it has been low. Alligators are also surveyed by Wildlife and Fisheries, and they conduct annual aerial surveys along transects. This year, or in 2023, it was between June 25th and 26th. In 2023, there was a total of 181 nests counted. Most of those were in fresh marsh. And there was a decline from 2022, but the counts are still really high. As you can see in this graph, counts have continued to trend upwards. And there was a bit of a jump, looks like between 2012 and 2013, where they're staying really quite elevated. And that might be due to an increase of fresh and intermediate marsh in the basin. They're doing quite well. Next, we'll look at oysters, looking at both seed oysters and sack oysters. So between 2022 and 2023, for seed oysters, there was a decline. In 2022, there were about 46,000 barrels, and in 2023, 18,632 barrels. If you look at seed oysters, the graph, if you put the graph there, long-term average, looking at the past 10 years, this year it was 55% below the 10-year average. If you look at sack oysters, we saw an increase. So it was about 11,648 barrels in 2022 and 21,436 barrels in 2023. Sack oysters rose above the long-term average. It's the highest it's been since 2015. Next, we'll look at brown shrimp. These are the dominant shrimp that are landed between May and July. And we saw increases in all three gear types that are shown here in 50-foot seines, in 16-foot trawls, and 6-foot trawls. The increase is insignificant for the 50-foot seine, but we did see a nice increase in 16-foot trawls. And in the 6-foot trawl, we had a pretty significant increase, and it rose above the long-term average of 10.8. And these values are catch per unit effort. So that's what we're reporting in. And it's the highest in the 6-foot trawls that we've seen since 2012. We also saw some good numbers for white shrimp. That's the dominant species that's landed during the fall season, mid-August or mid-December primarily. Was above the long-term average for all gear types. The 50-foot seines, the catch per unit effort in 2023 was 5.6. That's the highest it's been since 2008. In the 16-foot trawls, it declined slightly, but still it was the second highest that we have for the record. And in the 6-foot trawls, there was a slight increase. Catch per unit effort was 4.4, and the highest since 2010. And this was during the period of the drought, so salinities were higher during this time. Blue crabs didn't fare quite as well in 2023. We saw declines both in the 50-foot seines and in 16-foot trawls. Both were below the long-term average. It's been below the long-term average in the 50-foot seines for quite a while, since 2005. Largemouth bass, kind of a fresher fish. There was a decline in gill nets between 2022 and 2023, but the number of fish we're looking at is insignificant. There were 2 fish that were caught in 2023 and 6 in 2022, so not much of a difference. There was an increase in the 50-foot seine, but again, we're looking at 8 fish in 2023 and 2 in 2022, so not very significant. For redfish, or estuarine, sort of marine fish, in the gill nets there was a slight increase, still below the long-term average. In trammel nets, there was a slight decline. This is a species that has been designated as being subjected to some overfishing, and there were new regulations that were put into place in 2024. Speckled trout, we saw an increase in gill nets in 2023, 68 fish, whereas in 2022 it was 31 fish. Trammel net, we saw a slight decline. There were no fish caught in trammel nets in 2023, and it's only varied between 1 and 3 fish since 2018. This is another species that has been heavily fished, and there were new regulations put in place in 2023. So in summary, the first half of the year, we were largely within the range, operational range for the Breton Sound gauges. The drought had not yet really kicked in, so salinities were more typical for what we see for Breton Sound Basin. The second half of the year, salinities increased, especially at Crooked Bayou, and that was due to the drought, the low river stage, and the inability to operate the diversion. Diversion operations, as everyone knows, it requires a higher water level in the river than in the receiving basin because it is a gravity-fed diversion. So unfortunately, when we have droughts and low river stage, it becomes more difficult to actually operate the diversion because we need to make sure we don't have backflow through the structure. Mardi Gras Pass and other passes on the east bank of the river obviously are continuing to have a significant impact on salinity in the mid to lower basin. Salinity was lowest close to Mardi Gras Pass and increased west to east. And it's also increases north to south in the basin. And I think we are seeing an expansion of fresh to intermediate marsh in the basin. And that's everything I have. Do you want to take questions?
Thank you, Danielle. Yes. Yeah, I'll open it up to any questions from the committee. Hearing none, appreciate the thorough report. We will complete that agenda item. Thank you for that thorough report from the working group. With that, we will move on to items 6, 7, and 8. We will hear a summary of the proposed operations plan for 2025 from Mr. John Troutman. We'll follow up with public comments, and then we'll do a roll call vote on the proposed operations plan. So with that, I'll open it up to Mr. Troutman, and he'll give us a summary of the proposal for this upcoming year.
Thank you, Glenn. 1 second. Okay, let's see. Okay, so after hearing, what Danielle presented with kind of a look back at the most recent year and the longer term trends, we're here now to discuss setting a plan for 2025. So I have a few slides just to kind of set this up. All right, so Danielle covered this. I wanted to point out again, historically we've always used, the way the project was set up with the the 5 and 10 part per thousand post-project isohaline, and we use those gauges, Crooked Bayou and Stone Island. Also mentioned that, Bay Gardine and Snake Island gauges have been used in the past and are there. That's going to play into what kind of the committee decided. So, yeah, I also wanted to mention, I'm going to get there. And this, Danielle presented this. The only point to add here is this is a similar concept that we've used for the past, since 2013. There's been a variety of operations plans that have been used since the beginning of the project. But this is the most recent. It had all those features, the plan elements that you see on the screen. While it was useful, it does have some limitations, or it does have some advantages or disadvantages depending on where you sit. And one of the main complaints I think we've been thinking about for a few years, Mr. George Ricks in our meeting last year pointed this out. And so we decided to take another look and see if we can modify how we do operations. And one of the main complaints were that 10-year average that we're using to kind of guide the salinity range in operations. So a little more on that. And the main problem or the issue, that plan did work quite well, but the main issue is once we had Mardi Gras Pass and some of the lower leak points in the river really started putting a lot more fresh water into the basin, salinity has declined in the basin. And it's declined precipitously over the last few years, or since the onset of Mardi Gras Pass. And so the basin's different, and with those changing conditions, we're still using a plan that maybe was not quite suited for it. And so what it did, in using that 10-year average, it did kind of lower the salinity targets and triggers, which maybe allowed some operations that when things were fresh, it's lowered the triggers for that. So that was the two main considerations for that. And then in doing a look, we wanted to get back to kind of the original project goal of trying to find maybe an indicator species that might be one that we can use to target the whole estuary. So I'm going to get there in a second. I just wanted to point out the modification goals, that we had a couple of goals. One I just said lastly, that we want a salinity target that better supports the project and the project goals. And then other issues before is, the previous plan is a little complex, so we wanted to try and simplify it. How did we get there? We had, like good government does, plenty of meetings. We started internally with our diversion team, our extended diversion team at CPRA earlier in the year. We then moved on. We met with the Corps of Engineers. We have actually a series of quarterly meetings with them. And so we discussed changes to the plan to kind of kick off and gather ideas. And then the real helpful and big meeting is we did meet with Wildlife and Fisheries back in July. They sent plenty of representatives from their different programs. And as a result of that meeting, we asked them to present to us, and they did a great job of presenting some information that then we can use to take to the technical work group. We also, after that, we did go meet with George and some folks, John Lane from the St. Bernard Coastal Department. And then lastly, we had our technical work group meeting in November. It was the usual technical work group committee members, but we also had a similar high number of folks from Wildlife and Fisheries that attended. And I will say that meeting, both meetings with Wildlife and Fisheries were very productive, and I'd say we probably met 5 hours total. So the first one was 2. The technical work group meeting went a good 3 hours, and it was a good debate. So let's see. I just wanted, so in those meetings, these are the things that we need to consider. So all the operational parameters, there's only so many things you can tweak to kind of reach your goal. We talked about salinity ranges. ones that are appropriate for the estuary. In particular, Wildlife and Fisheries presented, and I'll cover that in a second, they presented after that first meeting some salinity targets for oysters and brown shrimp. And so that was the primary discussion when we moved to the technical work group meeting. Of course, there's gauge locations, as I showed you a minute ago, and you saw from Danielle that there we have 4 gauges to work with that are in various locations throughout the basin. And again, to the simplicity standpoint, we've used 2 gauges. We considered going down, maybe using just 1 instead of switching back and forth gauges throughout the year. Base flow is always a topic, and we did talk about the consult periods with Wildlife and Fisheries. So here's what, to back up a step, so I mentioned the information that Wildlife and Fisheries provided. You have on the top left is optimal salinity ranges for oysters in this case. These are from HSIs that have been developed. And then their recommendation that they've also provided, realizing that in this basin, because it's fresh and because of the other freshwater inputs, those aren't always achievable. And considering the diversion operations, there was a recommended salinity range for oysters in this case. If you look again, top left, the salinity minimum was 15 on the optimal, but in the recommended salinity ranges, you see they're a little lower across the board, in particular in December, January, and February. And that's pretty consistent with how even the other plan outlined operations that wintertime is really a good time with fewer fisheries impacts to be operating. And so this is taking the recommended salinity ranges in table format and just converting it into to a graphic form. So that's just with the green oyster graph is what I'll call it. So for example, January from 5 to 20, if you look across the table, you got a minimum of 5, maximum of 20. That's represented on the graph. And that's where we landed. So before I say that, I'll say we had a lot of discussion about brown shrimp and whether we use the brown shrimp model or we use the oyster model. And the result of the technical work group, we did have an actual vote of the members, and it was decided to adopt this plan. And so we would plan to use this oyster range and a 2-week moving average, as we did on past projects. I think it was felt that oysters were the best fit. I know the Corps would agree that oysters are the best fit for the project, because that was the basis of the original project concept. Another change, or kind of something that's different from the past plans we've been using, is we decided to go down to 1 gauge. So there's the simplification aspect of it. So you're not looking at 2 different gauges, 2 different times of year. And so on that, if you remember, Snake Island was smack dab in the middle of the 5 and the 15 part per thousand. So, and it basically averages out to a 10. So 1 gauge in the middle of the zone, the target zone. I will add that bullet number 3, we did add a cautionary 2 part per thousand buffer, and to explain that, so basically, if we're operating in January, for example, and salinities are higher and it's decreasing towards that 5 part per thousand minimum, the concern from committee members were, hey, let's not ride that salinity moving target. Let's not ride that till it hits 5 and then shut it off. So the idea was to put in a 2 part per thousand buffer. So in reality, we're looking at, for January, for example, we're looking at maintaining salinities between 7 and 20 instead of 5 and 20. So that's what that 2 part per thousand buffer is. I guess on a similar fashion, if we're below, say we're in August and we're below that salinity target, with our moving average, once we hit 5, again, there was concern, hey, let's not just turn on the diversion. Let's give it a little buffer. Let's let it shoot to the middle of the range. And I'll say, in practice, how we did the other plans where we had a 10-year average, we generally waited to open till it got above average. So we never were like operating off of the minimum trigger. So nonetheless, we did put the 2 part per thousand buffer, as I just explained, to kind of guard against that. We did maintain, so things that didn't change, we did maintain the 500 cubic foot per second base flow. That's when we're not doing pulses, we'll just drop back to the base flow. And we also maintain the consult periods as they were. They're represented differently here, just the lines on the bottom of the graph, but we do have the one in March for brown shrimp and the 2 other oyster consult periods throughout the year. Give you an example, hold on one second. So this is an overlap here, the proposed plan, the green oyster plan with that 10-year moving average and range looked for Snake Island. So this is an example of overlapping the 2 plans. And the take home here is during the winter months, December, January, February, and a little bit into March, we would have some flexibility to operate the Caernarvon diversion, just like you did in the old plan. With these higher salinity targets after April, you can see where they don't overlap that, we had some, it's more limiting here. So it limits how much we can do during the warmer time of the year, really getting through kind of the late fall. So that's some kind of the differences between the way we used to operate and the way we're proposing here. Here's another look, and that's actually using the Stone Island gauge, which is the 15 part per thousand isohaline. And I'd say if we were, this was originally proposed before the technical work group meeting, but the work group decided to use snake instead. This one would probably allow a little more operations by using this gauge. Just another look with more data. The green oyster blob, but the lines that you're seeing are the 10-year averages without their ranges, but the 10-year averages for all 4 of the gauges we've been talking about. The top one is Stone Island, followed by Snake, and then Bay Gardine, and then the bottom one would be Crooked Bayou, which would be 5. And it even shows the periods of operation from the old plan. So just you've got more details in your plan that you have in front of you. It was written up with more details, but anyway, just another visual here for everybody in the room to see kind of the differences between the way we've operated in the past and the way we're proposing today. So to summarize all this, the technical work group, after a lot of good meetings, a good meeting then, we did recommend doing a trial period or a pilot plan this year for Caernarvon. And that's the green oyster-based salinity ranges that I just outlined. The goals were to simplify it, so we did so by switching to 1 gauge rather than 2. And then more importantly, we moved away from the 10-year average salinity more to just a target, not based on averages. I mentioned it, I'll reiterate it, probably some minor impacts during the winter, maybe fewer operations then, early spring and fall, but there's more restrictions on the proposed plan through the hotter months. So we did keep the consult periods as they were for wildlife fisheries. We didn't change base flow, and we did keep a 2-week moving average, and Danielle explained that with the high variation in salinity day to day and week to week. That's why we've stuck with a 2-week for so many years, because it makes the most sense. All right, and that's all I had for presenting the proposed plan. And Glenn, you mentioned in the, on the agenda, we have kind of separate agenda items, but they're kind of wrapped into one here. So next steps here is take questions from the committee here and have, we're going to need a motion to start off the discussion. And then we'll hear public comment. And then finally, as part of that motion, we'll do a roll call vote on the plan, on the proposed plan. So I guess we'll open it up then with questions.
Yeah, thank you, John. I'll open it up to the committee with questions.
Yes, John, I have a question. So the new proposed plan, do you foresee a decrease in operation or an increase in operation in a normal year?
I see a decrease.
Okay.
Higher targets, George.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I also have a question, sort of related to that. Can you compare, you had two like medium-sized pulses in 2023, and if you would have followed this new proposed plan, would you have had those pulses, or would they have been timed differently, or not as strong?
Good question, Eva. I think we would have had the first one, similar pulse. The second one was later, it was in March, and that was our consult period with Wildlife and Fisheries. At the time, they didn't have any objections to that, so we did do a smaller pulse at the time. And the new plan, again, there's the consult period, it just depends on the year, but we did leave that in there. And I'm glad you mentioned that. I did mean to give fair due to the arguments or the debates in the technical work group meeting. The month of March was the main sticking point, because some brown shrimp representative would rather have that a little higher. I think the committee, we decided that as long as we leave that consult period in there, it gives the ability to communicate with Wildlife and Fisheries. Go from there. So to answer your question, first pulse, yes. Second pulse, maybe.
You said in the oysters, you had 55% increase in the oysters in the regime you had before. That was what Ms. Danielle. 55% increase in the oysters. How do you put that?
So it was for it was for the SAC. So that's what the data showed.
And
That was from between the 2022 and 2023 season.
And what area, do you have Pacific area that come out, or that's just the east side of the river?
That is just for the Breton Sound Basin. So at the sites where Wildlife and Fisheries does their, it's based on the meter square sampling that they do.
These are fisheries independent data, right?
Yeah. And what do you see to increase that? What is the reason for increasing that?
I think Wildlife and Fisheries could probably address that better.
Higher salinities
Carl,
due to the drought.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Very true, and I think what your biggest seeing, that's state or private?
That's on the public.
On the public ground. I agree. I just want to clarify that. I agree with that.
I'll just chime in. Related to the.
Bring your mic down a little bit, if you don't mind.
Turn your mic on.
Check. Just, no question, just a general statement that we, after meeting multiple times for long hours, we are in agreement with the concept of the new plan and how it works out. And it's just, for us, it was just really important to maintain those consult periods as we have them. So it's a good thing for us, as well as that 2-part buffer. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Carl.
Thank you, Carl. Appreciate all the work that the working group did, and Wildlife and Fisheries and y'all's hard work to get to this point. So thank you. With that, any other questions from the committee? Hearing none, we'll move on to agenda item 7, public comment. So we'll go ahead and open it up for public comment right now. Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I applaud the CPRA for wanting to change this plan. It was I kind of feel responsible for it. Last year, I made a big stink about, ran the diversion almost the third week of March. And I think, Ms. Davis, I think you agree with me about the operation plan. I know we work off of the 10-year average, 10-year monthly average was ludicrous, to say the least. The estuary has changed drastically in the last 5 years, much less 10 years. And we've seen a decrease in the redfish. They changed the plan, the limits, and also in speckled trout. And, they contribute the speckled trout issue to overfishing, but I don't think that's so. I think we lost a lot of spawning areas. I've seen it. I know for a fact that we lost a lot of spawning areas in Black Bay because of freshwater influence. And, Mr. Troutman, I noticed you co-authored a study, a paper with Ms. Hankel in 2023. And I kind of took offense to one statement in your paper. No, you didn't name me in it, but it says stakeholder voting power leads to ineffective operations. The structure of the CIAC, where stakeholder representatives can vote on operations and other issues, makes it difficult to change project operation and implementation over time as monitoring data amasses. You kind of played down TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, and kind of put stakeholder involvement down on the list. And I think that's very important, stakeholder involvement. Look at what I did. We, made people look at things differently. We're not just talking about elephant ears and hyacinths and willow trees. We're talking about people's livelihoods are involved in the operation of this plan and this diversion. I've seen it since it opened up in 1991. I've seen what it's done. And, you talk about traditional ecological knowledge. The old fishermen, prior to Hurricane Katrina, after the oil spill, when they ran a diversion so hard, they start to see the marsh breaking up. And the old fishermen would say, the marsh looks like it's got cancer. And they kind of knew what they were talking about, because when Hurricane Katrina came in, we lost 42 square miles overnight in the Delaware area. So St. Bernard, I'm speaking for St. Bernard, but we're not just interested in the operational plan of diversion, but it affects our economy. And so Plaquemines Parish also. We're not talking about alligators and crawfish and frogs and ducks. We're talking about brown shrimp and oysters, the stuff that drives our economy in our two parishes. And I'd like the committee to take that into consideration when they go over this plan. Thank you.
I own several thousands of acres of oyster grounds and all over the state. And for us, we're traveling, instead of an hour or a half an hour, we're traveling 5 hours to get to our reefs. This year, with the drought and the way y'all operate less, some of our reefs in Lake Machau has come back, showed life. We had some of the best productions we had in the last 10 years, last 5 years. It shows we can bring this around. We just need a little participation. We talk in Caernarvon, when we got the biggest thorn in our back is Mardi Gras Pass, which y'all can't control. And it's wiping us out little by little. And this is just a trigger to what's going on. But if we can get our estuaries, which are oyster estuaries, and now with that there, we can provide shrimp, fish, a little bit of everything. So I like this plan. It's a start. Better than what I heard before. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robin and Mr. Ricks. Appreciate the comments. As you know, we value your input and the entire committee, and so we'll continue to work through this. the diversion is obviously a balance, and so Wildlife and Fisheries has given us good input, and we've incorporated that into this revised plan. So thank you. With that, I'd like to open it up to public comments.
I feel like I need to make one more comment, since Mr. Ricks did pull out a quote from a paper that I was not quite the lead author on. I will say, George, I heard what you read. I'm not sure you're interpreting that completely correctly. We've been in this committee, we've taken public comments. The reason the plans have changed over the years are from the committee and public comments. So just to defend myself a little on that one, we'll have to have a sidebar on that. All right, thanks.
Hi, I'm Robert Gardner, resident in New Orleans. You pointed out the goals as 3 goals. One of them was the protecting the health of the existing wetlands. I forget the exact terminology for it. But I didn't see any data on how much land loss there has been or gain. It's just a shift in the nature of the character of the wetlands. Do you have any information about land loss, not just in the last year, but over maybe for a longer period of time as well?
Yeah. So one thing that we started doing this past year is we did our first official USGS land water analysis in the Breton Sound estuary, but it's limited to the ponding area, so the area closest to the diversion outfall. So we had a land water analysis conducted there in 1998. That was the only thing. We were only able to do one because we just had enough money to do one this past year, and that quantified the actual land and acres in that area. At that point, it was about 50. Well, no, it was mainly water, very little land, because it was shortly after the start of diversion operations. But we are going to be doing additional analyses like this, 2008, 2018, and then moving forward with imagery on a 10-year basis, and that will allow for a publishable, quantifiable account of land changes in that area. So that will come out in future reports. But there have been studies that have shown increases in land in that ponding area. John, I know you had presented that data last year. I think that showed the increases in the Big Mar area. So there have been increases, but I don't have those numbers with me.
Do you have any comments on the Mardi Gras Pass effect on land creation or loss?
I don't have numbers that I can present, but there is land gain in that area. But yeah.
Okay. I would just comment that I think trying to track that, as you indicated, in the future might be a new thing for the committee to look at.
Thank you.
We appreciate the comment. Thank you. With that, any other public comments before we move on to agenda item 8? Hearing none, we'll move on to agenda item 8. This is the roll call vote on the recommended operations plan for 2025 that Mr. Troutman presented. And so with that, I'll take a motion to open that up for vote. Thank you, Mr. Jeff. Second by Carl. So with that, we'll take a roll call vote on the operations plan. Yes, before we do that, is there any more discussion from the committee needed?
One more thing, question I'd like to ask Mr. Troutman. At what CFS are we planning on operating in the diversion when we operate it? What's the maximum?
8,000.
8,000 CFS.
Yeah, and as you know, Mr. Ricks, it's limited by the stage in the river.
You're right, I understand.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do a roll call vote. John, would you conduct the roll call vote?
sure will. Okay. The chair does not vote unless necessary, unless there's a tie, so we're gonna skip you, Glenn. Army Corps of Engineers, John Fogarty, and so I'm looking for a yay or a nay or a yes or a no.
Yay.
Yay to accept, okay. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Kathy Bro. NRCS, Mr. Boatman.
Yay.
EPA, Mr. Gutierrez.
Yay.
National Marine Fisheries Service, Dawn.
Yay.
Sarah Krupa, LDENR.
Yay.
Wildlife and Fisheries, Carl Britt.
Yep.
DHH is not here. Department of Environmental Quality, Jeff.
Yes.
Plaquemines Parish, Kimberly.
Yay.
St. Bernard Parish, George.
Yay.
Oyster Fisheries Representative, Mr. Robin.
Yes.
No shrimp, no recreational. Marsh property owners, Mike Friso.
Yes.
And then Punch Drink Conservancy, yes.
Thank you. It passed by unanimous vote. Again, appreciate all the hard work, always taking into account the feedback from all of the communities and committee members. We appreciate everything that goes into this. A lot of data, a lot of additional data that we'll be collecting. So really great to see another upcoming year. With that, we'll move on to item number 9, new business. Mr. Troutman, do we have any new business to address?
We have none.
Thank you. Hearing that, we are ready for adjournment. I'll take a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Ricks. Second. With that, meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.